everybody, welcome back to the Claremont Classic Garage. Today we're going to do a video that I hope will be helpful to everybody out there. We're going to step by step, wire by wire, connection by connection, do the wiring on this 8N behind us here. There's lots of questions all the time about wiring on these things, and we're going to lay it all to rest here today. I'm going to do this video in two parts. The first part we're going to do today is going to be the ignition and the charging and the battery and that sort of stuff. Just the basic, get the tractor up and running stuff. And in the next video, I'll do all the lights. So before we get started with wires, I have to mount a few components onto the tractor. So we're going to start with these, the gauges, the ignition switch, the tattletale light for the charging system. And I'll be back once I've got those things installed. Looking at our gauges here, you can see these are the illuminated ones. So we could actually have dash lights. Not a lot of ends have that. Now this is hard to see, but oh, there, you can just see it there. Before we mount the ammeter, you can see the two terminals are labeled battery and load. And I know I'll never be able to see those once it's mounted on the tractor, so I transferred that over onto the sides with a Sharpie. I've learned a few things after doing this all these years. Our gauges are installed. I put the indicator light for the alternator down here, mostly because there was already a hole there from something else in a previous life. Usually I would put it here right under the amp meter, but it's okay there. And this hole here, I guess that's where somebody originally had a light switch. That's where we'll put the light switch in the lighting video. The last thing we have to mount is the little piece of insulating material and the ignition resistor, but I have to explain a few things about that first, so we'll go over to the bench. Here's the two resistors for Ford tractors. This is an 8N one, and this is a 9N or 2N one. Now, when you switch to 12 volts, if you go to a 12 volt coil, you can just continue using this. If you use in your 6 volt coil still, it gets a little complicated with putting resistors in series and stuff. I just don't like doing it that way. It's aggravating and it never works out exactly right. So what we're going to do, we cannot use this because it's disintegrated. And this one is a really nice 9N one. I want to save that for a 9N. So what we've done here is I drilled a hole through the top corner of it, and we're going to use an aftermarket, like this is off a car, like a 60s Ford or GM car, or pardon me, GM or Chrysler car. So we're just going to use that in there. And this piece of phenolic insulates it and provides a place for our junction terminal, and we need that. So we're going to go install this on the tractor now. Before we start working on the 12 volt wiring or the primary wiring, we're going to get the ignition secondary laid in. Now, before you put your plug wires in on a front distributor tractor, whether it be a 8N, a 9N, or a 2N, this bracket is really important. It goes on that bolt there, and it holds the wires for number 1 and number 2 away from the fan and the belt. Now, in lieu of this, you can get this at any of the places that sell Ford tractor restoration parts. If you don't have one, it's not a deal killer. You can just tie wrap those two wires to the bail, the coil bail. But I like putting the right thing on if I have one. All right, it's easy. You can buy tailor-made wire sets for these things that are all the right length, but after doing what I do for so many years, I've got a gigantic box of plug wires. So I just go through them, and I find usually ones what I need. For these ends, you need ones with 90-degree boots on the plugs, or 45s you might get away with. But straight up and down ones, they're going to hit the gas tank, and it just doesn't look good. So what we do, I just put a little silicone spray on here, get the boot off, And then we feed it down through here, and it's unavoidable. You're going to end up having to, you know, shorten some of them. So let's see here what we got. So that goes on there like that. And then, see, it's kind of long, right? By the time it goes through that bracket. Oops. Let's see here. See how much we have to shorten it. Huh. It's actually not all that bad, but if we pull it through this way, yeah, that's a little more how it needs to be. So we do have to shorten this one about, you know, 3 or 4 inches. Once we've decided we need to shorten it, we're just going to kind of figure out how much we need to shorten it by. Probably about that much. And then you have to leave a little bit extra for the stripping and crimping. So that's how much we're going to shorten this guy. Once you cut it, it's cut. What do you think of this, guys? Are you learning to do wiring? So we spread this open with a screwdriver bit, and you just pull it off. And grab our stripper here. A little more. And you flip that over. And then once you've got it back together, we just use our crimping tool here. And it's got an ignition. It'll never do like a nice factory crimp, but we can get it pretty good. Now I'll put a little silicone on there. And we can get our little booty back on. Just a little patience, it'll go on. And then that goes in number 1. And slide the boot over it. We'll repeat that 3 more times, and I'll be back when I've got it all done. We've got our secondary ignition cables laid in. So now we're going to start building the harness. The first thing we have to lay in is the alternator and ignition wires into that wire tube where we just put the high tension leads. So what you need for that, if you know, for all these 6 feet long, okay? This one's a little extra long because that's how long it was. I saved scraps of wire, and that's what I make these things out of. If you know for a fact you've got a 30 or 35 amp alternator, this big fat yellow guy can be number 12. If it's a 60, do what we've done, go with a number 10. If you've got 80, 90, 100 amp alternator, that's way overkill for a tractor. You should maybe start thinking about running number 8 or even number 6. But this number 10 is good enough. And then we need 2 more conductors, 16 or 14 gauge all the way through. And if you are going to be putting a Pertronix ignition, you need to run a 3rd one of these. We're not dealing with that right now because we don't have a Pertronix. And this stuff gets confusing. If your alternator has been converted to 1-wire operation, you can take away one of these. So if we had a 1-wire alternator, all you would need is the fat one for the output and one of these small ones for the ignition. But we have a normal alternator that needs to be excited by the ignition. So we've got 1 fat one for the output, 2 skinny ones for the ignition and the alternator exciting. Again, like I said, if you're running a Pertronix, you're going to need 1 extra one, but we're not. Now we're going to feed this through the tube. Sometimes it goes easy, sometimes not so easy. You just keep fiddling around with it, and sometimes you have to pull it back out and start over again. I got it through once. There it is. It's through. Good. I'm going to pull it out a little bit. I have to run a little bit more tape. So pull this through so you've got about, I don't know what that's, about 10 inches of the wire coming through. The first thing we're going to do is cut the coil wire to length. Just bring it up, pull it up to there, and see at the fan, that's about where you want to cut it. So you've got maybe 4 inches of it coming out of the tube. Then we crimp an eyelet on it. So once the coil's installed, that will attach to the stud on the top of it. When we hook up our alternator, put an eyelet with a 1/4 inch hole on there. And this one, leave it a little bit longer and put a female spade. Then we also have to make a little jumper with the same thing, an eyelet that'll fit over that stud, and a female spade. You'll see here these terminals are marked 1 and 2. So when we put it together, that guy goes on there, and this guy, the one that comes from the indicator light, goes on number 1. And then this guy goes here on number 2. And it jumps over to that stud. But put this one on first. I haven't got enough fingers. I'll be back in a sec. Once you've got it hooked up, just make sure that you've got it routed, the wiring routed, so that it's away from the belt and the fan on the alternator, as well as the engine fan. I guess that's a long way away. And make sure you keep it away from this number 1 exhaust port. We're good here. We've got tons of room for everything. Probably what I should have done was remove these 4 screws and clock the case around so that this was at the top. But I didn't. It's fine like this. Once we're done at the alternator, get your wiring that's coming through and just keep it like that, laid together and in behind, like between the oil pressure pipe and the battery box. Next thing we have to make is this. About 40 inches of the same wire we used for the alternator output, and 4 feet of number 14 wire, and put them together like so, with an eyelet on this and an eyelet on that, which will fit over the stud on your solenoid. Now we'll go put it on. And you can see here how this little harness we've just made attaches to the solenoid. Leave this nut loose for now because we still have to put the battery cable onto there. But this one back here you can tighten up. And this is a common mistake that people make when they're wiring up these tractors. The actual starter switch will be no good, and people will use a key switch to start it, and they mistakenly apply 12 volts to that, and the thing will never start. This actually grounds the coil in the solenoid. When you push the button there, you're grounding this coil, and that's what pulls the solenoid contacts together and cranks the engine. So anyway, once we've got that hooked up to there, it just kind of runs along through there. And then it joins with this harness here. So I'm going to get that taped up a little bit, and then I'll be back. Once that's all taped up, it goes up under here. Now, there should be a couple of little clips that pop into those holes and hold it, but I don't have them, so we'll use the next best thing, tie wraps. We have our harness tie wrapped to the underside of this channel now. and then it comes up through the end here, and it goes in this clip, and it ends over here. Now we can start making our connections. First wire we're going to hook up is the battery wire that comes from the starter solenoid, and that goes to the battery side of the ammeter. Next, we're going to shorten up this and put an end on it, and that is going to be our ignition feed. Next wire is the output wire from the alternator, and we put a ringlet on it and put it on our insulated power stud. Now we need to make a little jumper like this out of the same gauge wire as our charging wire, and that is going to go from the load terminal of the ammeter down here to our power stud. Next thing to make is a couple of feet of 12 wire, and we put a ringlet on one end. And even though we're doing the lights in another video, this is the feed wire for the lights. So you're gonna feed that through here, and it's gonna come up back to our power stud. That's why I put the split loom on it, because it'll be rattling around down inside the dash there. The last thing that's gonna go on the power stud here is one of the leads from our ignition switch. That goes on there. Then we can put the nut on it and tighten it up. Now we're going to hook up our alternator indicator light. I've got one half of it hooked up to this wire. I just used a bullet connector, which goes down there to there. Now the other half has to get spliced into this, and so that becomes ignition positive. And we got one wire left, and that's the starter wire, or the starter solenoid wire. So it just runs down here. We put a grommet. There's a slotted hole in the bottom of the dash there. You put a grommet, run the wire through. Then we're going to strip it. Then I slide a boot from a spark plug wire over it, and we'll crimp on the end and put it together. And that goes together just like that. I've put our battery in. I get my batteries out the local wrecking yard. 60 bucks. They guarantee them for a year, I think. You can't go wrong with them. The ones I like to use on these little tractors are 26 or 26R. This one's a 26R. They're the ones that you find mostly. They're pretty popular. I made a little strap and a couple of bolts to hold it down so it can't go anywhere. And now we're going to get it hooked up. We'll get the positive cable installed first. There's the positive cable installed. This is a 6-volt cable. That's why it's so heavy, but it won't hurt anything. Heavy is better than not heavy enough. Now we'll go ahead and do the ground cable. And I always put on these Ford tractors, I always put one of these things so I can disconnect the battery when I park it. And there's our negative cable attached. Now, dare I close this and see what happens? Let's watch our amp gauge while I close it and make sure we don't see any. Oh, nothing happening there. We'll just let it sit there for a second with the battery closed and make sure nothing goes up in flames. All right. Let's see what we got here. So before I close the circuit to the battery, we'll just make sure. Oops, I'm on the wrong side of it. Sometimes I wonder about myself. There we go. Okay, we're good there. Now let's close this. Don't hear any sparks or smoke, so let's check for power where we should have power. There. Yeah, good. There. Good. And we should have power there. Good. But not there. We should have power there. Good. We should have power there, but not there. We should have power there. There. And there. That's good. Now, when we put the ignition on, we should see our indicator light up. Good. Excellent. And we should have juice to the resistor. Yep. And down here to the ignition coil. Yep. Perfect. Now I'll give the starter a bump and see if it works. There we go. Good. We're all set. Last thing we have to do, once the hood is back on, we'll do the final tweaking of the alternator. Sometimes you have to, this lower bracket here, you have to rotate it this way or that. It's a fine line between this not hitting the hood side and this not hitting the axle, the alternator when the axle pivots. So we'll do that. That'll be the last step, but you know, the parts are all there for now, so we're all set. Well, that is the 8N electrical video done. I've always wanted to make this video for you guys, and I'm glad I was finally able to do it. Wire by wire, we laid it all in. We made our own harness, and it all went quite well. Don't get me wrong. For those that want to, you can buy a pre-made harness for an 8N with an alternator conversion. If that's how you want to do it, you'll save yourself this step of making the harness. But I've always just made them myself because I've got the junk all laying around here, right? So it's just as easy for me to make it myself. Anyway, I want to thank you all for watching this. Please come back for the next video where we'll do the second part of this. I'm going to put all the lights on it with a set of flashers and everything. I'll show you how to do that one wire by wire so that there's no confusion when you go to do it yourself. Anyway, until then, thanks for tuning in. Thanks in advance for coming back. And we'll see you next time on the Claremont Classic Garage. So long for now.